It may surprise you to know that electric cars were once the most popular vehicles on the road. A century later, they're a rare sight. But the need to reduce emissions and find alternatives to fossil fuels means they may be poised to make a comeback. Euronews travelled to Brussels to speak to Jacques de Selliers, founder of the European Association for Battery Electric Vehicles. He says it's only a matter of time before petrol and diesel-powered vehicles become just a memory, and we'll all be going electric. Electric vehicles seem a very good idea. Why don't we have more of them?
There are two reasons why we don't have more of them. First of all, the supply is very low. If you want to buy an electric car, you don't have a very wide choice. And the second reason is that they are more expensive, much more expensive than petrol cars for the moment.
Give me an example. The car you drive, what does that cost? How much is that?
It costs something like 15,000 euros.
Right.
For 15,000 euros, consumers prefer buying something bigger.
Sure. OK, well, we'll come to that in a minute, actually, the psychological reasons for buying cars. So what does it cost to run, for instance?
On the other hand, there it's very cheap, because with my little car, it costs me something like €1 per 100 kilometers. If I charge at night, which I do, of course, because it's cheaper. And so that means that over the lifetime of the car, I'll save €10,000, which is nice. But then consumers don't think about that when they buy the car. They think of the price tag.
One of the reasons for introducing them is because they save emissions. Do they actually save emissions?
Definitely, yes, and a lot more than most alternatives. It, of course, depends on the way the electricity is produced, because electricity produces emissions. So it depends in which country you are charging. In a country like France or Norway, where the electricity is very low CO2, it's virtually no emission for an electric car. If you take the average European electricity mix, it saves over 50% of the CO2 emission.
Are they really a solution for countries where they're heavily dependent on fossil fuel-generated power?
Less so, indeed. Actually, the worst in terms of CO2 emission is coal plants. And with a coal plant, an electric car is roughly, as good as a petrol car.
Now, we choose cars for reasons other than efficiency and practicality. We choose them because we desire them. We desire them in certain colours. We desire them to be impressive. How is the electric car industry going to actually satisfy those desires?
Well, clearly for the moment, what's fashionable is to drive a big, heavy car, typically,
an SUV.
An SUV. But I think this is a bit of a fashion. However, there's going to be a next fashion that's going to replace it. And, of course, electric cars producers must understand what is the next fashion that's going to appeal to customers. Maybe, for instance, by giving them a very technological look, a very futuristic look, may help the introduction of electric cars. But that's a question for designers, not for engineers like me.
So, OK, we've talked about what manufacturers can do to make electric cars more desirable. What can governments do? What should governments do?
Well, they should do it all. I mean, basically, for one very good reason, is electric cars bring virtually no benefit to their owners. They bring benefit to society. So who's in charge of imposing measures for society, or promoting them, rather than imposing them? It's governments. And so they have to give some, I would say the most important is purchase incentives for buyers, for car buyers.
OK, what incentives?
Well, it should be a mix of both financial incentives, but the second thing that's even more effective for early adopters is other incentives like free unlimited parking on public space, or access to bus lanes, and also, of course, charging infrastructure. No one will buy an EV if he can't charge it at home.
How can we make the process of switching to electric and other alternative fuel vehicles go faster?
Clearly, for manufacturers, well, you know, like subsidies or cheap loans to build an electric car plant. Also very important, providing training for people that are going to design and maintain these cars. You know, it's going to require a change in competences in the automobile field.
We haven't talked about dwindling oil or dwindling cheap oil yet. And that's got to be a driving factor, hasn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, this factor is enough just to justify the promotion of electric cars. We are, as you say, at the end of cheap oil. Prices are going to rise. Consumption is rising very fast in, you know, developing countries like China, India, and Brazil. And you know, there are some limits to how much cheap oil we can produce.
What cars will we be driving in, say, 15 years' time?
What I really think is at some turning point, whether it's going to be in 15 years' time or 20 years' time, you know, electric cars are just going to become the norm, and the fraction of new cars will go from maybe, you know, 10 or 15% to 100% in very little time.
Speed bumps.